Can you see?
Yes, yes. And then just you can just go ahead and put it in presentation mode, I think. Yep, perfect. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. I'll try to explain what this book is. As was said before, this is a kind of history of Costa Smeralda. This is the cover of the book, and this is a photo I took to Costa Smeralda some years ago because I go there really frequently. It's a nice place in Sardinia. Now I will try to contextualize Sardinia and Costa Smeralda in the general context of Italy. I went to Costa Smeralda many times, especially what sparked my interest and my wish to write a book on Costa Smeralda was going there between the two lockdowns of the pandemic. Because I saw another Costa Smeralda, because tourists were not there because of the pandemic. So I could see really probably what Costa Smeralda was before Costa Smeralda. And I tried to do research about this, and I discovered that Costa Smeralda had a really fascinating history. I come from media studies, so my point of view was from the media. But during the making of this book, I also changed my point of view. I started from a semiotic point of view. I'm a semiotician and a cultural historian, but I became interested in architecture, for example, because Costa Smeralda was an extraordinary architectural adventure. So I found really interesting the whole history of Costa Smeralda and tried to understand also, for example, economic reasons behind the construction of Costa Smeralda. But we should start from the very beginning of the history. What is Costa Smeralda? First of all, Costa Smeralda is a really small part of Sardinia. Sardinia is the second island of the Mediterranean Sea after Sicily, and is between Italy and Spain in the Mediterranean part called Tirreno Sea, which is the sea dividing Italy and Spain. Sardinia has a really interesting history and also old history. Was the base of the first people colonizing the Mediterranean Sea, and has a really interesting story which can still be seen. If you go to Costa Smeralda, we can still see, for example, nuraghe. Nuraghe are these prehistoric buildings which we know, we can see, but we know to a certain extent. We still ignore what they really were. So it's a really interesting history. And in the first part of the book, I tell the story of Sardinia. And also the difficult relationships which really frequently were between Sardinia and Italy. Sardinia, in many moments of history, was detached from Italy. In other more recent times, tried to detach from history. There was a really strong separatist movement, and they almost managed to separate the island from Italy. So the relationship between Sardinia and Italy have always been difficult, and I try to explain this because this was also one of the first reasons why Costa Smeralda could be generated. Why? Because in 1952, a really powerful British entrepreneur, the Aga Khan, also an Arab and an Islamic leader, the legend says was sailing with his yacht, discovering this beach. This is called today the Prince Beach, la spiaggia del Principe. And he was attracted by this beautiful place, but also attracted by the economic interest that this beach somehow unveiled to him. So he found this part of Costa Smeralda really beautiful, but also interesting from an economic point of view. So he went back to London and talked to some friends, explaining that there was a wonderful place really close to Britain, to France, to Spain, but to Europe in general, and this could become a new tourist destination, really attracting exclusive tourists from all over the world. So the first, after this contextualization, I try to analyze the first part of the history of Costa Smeralda. So the intuition that it was a commercial business. For example, Costa Smeralda, the name, is not a geographic name. In the maps, you don't find Costa Smeralda, but it's a commercial brand, Costa Smeralda. It's a name that the Aga Khan and his collaborators chose. So as a semiotician, I can say that they add another level of reality over the old territory. The real name of what is named today Costa Smeralda was another one. But Costa Smeralda became the name of the entire coast I showed you before, so that part of Sardinia. The old name was Monti di Mola, so the local people knew this area as Monti di Mola, but today Monti di Mola is an almost unknown name. Everyone knows the name Costa Smeralda. So the history of Costa Smeralda became, and the first part, and I try to explain, to develop this part in chapter 3, was the material construction, which was an extraordinary architectural adventure, because from scratch they built two towns and many hotels. They refurbished some old buildings which the shepherd owned, etc. To do so, the Aga Khan constituted a society and bought the land. This is one of the most interesting element of this first part. How was it possible to buy a part of a nation? Because the Italian politicians and the Sardinian politicians allowed the Aga Khan to do so, because they understood that probably Aga Khan was able, because of his economic power, was able to do something that in Italy was impossible to do without the arrival of capitals from abroad. This is the bad part of this history. Italian politicians let the Aga Khan do not whatever he wanted to do, but to buy this land and to build something that was inexisting, non-existing before. And the good part was that the Aga Khan was a really concerned person and built Costa Smeralda following really new principles about sustainability in years where sustainability was not a thing. But he was already concerned with pollution, with good architecture, with nature, with respect for nature. So Costa Smeralda had laws which were different from the Italian laws. For example, you could and you can't today, still today, smoke on the beaches. Buildings can't go beyond 3 or 4 levels, while in the rest of Italy you can build whatever you want. So, luckily, this was the positive aspect of this history. Costa Smeralda was built respecting nature. Another rule was that you couldn't use materials which were not locals. So you, for building houses, hotels, also the walls, you had to respect some rules, utilizing local materials and respecting the architectural style of Sardinia. For example, all the walls were built with the local stones. So it was not an invasion of another style ruining the old Sardinian style, but was a kind of modernization of that style. What was really bad was that Italy, the state, Italian politicians didn't intervene as mediators between the owners, the old owners, which were sometimes rich Sardinian families, but other times small owners, and the new owners. So the business was ruled by the owners and the sellers. And this clearly was unbalanced because you had on the one side, the new owners were really powerful British entrepreneurs, really used to buy land, to buy things from other people, and so on. And the sellers were shepherds and Sardinian families, who had no idea of the real value of that land. So these British entrepreneurs could buy this land at a really low price. Sardinians politicians ruled the aesthetical norms, but never intervened into the business between the sellers and the new owners. So Costa Smeralda became a good business for Aga Khan and the other entrepreneurs, but they respected some principles of Sardinian architecture and respect for nature. Aga Khan called some of the best architectures of those years. This is Jacques Well, a French architecture, and this is the villa he built for himself, because all of them built many, many hotels, houses, but also villas for themselves, and many of them lived in Costa Smeralda for many, many years. This is the villa, Jack Wells villas. This is Hotel Cala di Volpe, which is still, Quell's villa is not there anymore. It was destroyed in the 1990s, and another villa is now built over the old one. But Hotel Cala di Volpe, which was probably the most beautiful hotel built in Costa Smeralda in those years, is still there. You can book, for example, you can find it in booking.com and other websites, but it was refurbished at the beginning of the 21st century. So it's not the original, but it saves some of the old parts, and the style remained less or more the same of the original building. But there was also an immaterial construction of Costa Smeralda. I come from media studies, and so in some parts of the book, I analyze the media construction of Costa Smeralda, which was clearly concentrated on the figure of Aga Khan, which was represented as a young, powerful and really smart, intelligent leader wanting to give to Italy something new, a new idea of tourism, a new idea of free time. The Aga Khan was in the center of this media construction. For example, his meetings with Italian politicians were always underlined by the press. Aga Khan was represented as really smart and trustworthy. So the newspapers, the media somehow justified what the Italian politicians were doing. They are trusting the Aga Khan because the Aga Khan is a really trustworthy person. This is a really interesting element. Among the entrepreneurs, there were René and Giselle Podbielski. They were not entrepreneurs at all. René Podbielski was a novelist, and Giselle Podbielski was a United Nations speaker and essayist. She was a great expert of global politics and wrote really interesting books about it. But they were friends of the Aga Khan, and they followed him in this adventure. And their history and their story is really, really nice because they played a kind of spiritual role within this group of entrepreneurs. And also they approach Sardinia, Costa Smeralda, nature in a really different way, much more respectful. They built their house, their villa in a small beach, not the beach of the big hotels, etc. And they spent their whole lives, their entire lives in that place. They are today buried in a small cemetery in Costa Smeralda. Their sons are there and live in Sardinia, so they are protagonists of a really nice and interesting story. And there is one of my sources was Giselle Podbielski, because she released a really long and really interesting interview to Italian television telling the whole history of Costa Smeralda. When Costa Smeralda was ready to be visited by tourists, the first era was the era of inaccessibility. The first tourists were really rich, exclusive, coming from the United States and Northern Europe, Sweden, Norway, Germany sometimes, and they didn't want the media in because they wanted to be free to live their holidays without any photographers, televisions, journalists, and so on. So the first years were in the first year. Costa Smeralda was really, really inaccessible. Then became somehow more accessible, but always for a really high level of tourists, high class of tourists. But the 1970s changed totally the scenario because of social reasons. Sardinia was a really poor region, poor island, and the contrast between the poor people of Sardinia and these really rich people coming from other countries just to have holidays was really impactful. So Sardinia in the 1970s became a land of crime and especially of kidnapping. So Sardinian criminals went to Costa Smeralda, kidnapped these really rich people and asked money to release these people, asked money to their families. It became about 7, 8 years, 10, the 1970s, less or more. This, for the first time, the identity of Costa Smeralda was in crisis because many people went away, choosing more safer places. And Costa Smeralda was in crisis. So what to do with this beautiful place? Which kind of tourists can we invite? After when the crime, the criminal trend finished, in Italy there was another trend, which was Berlusconism. And Costa Smeralda became a kind of headquarter of Berlusconism. Berlusconi bought some villas in Costa Smeralda and organized many meetings. So again, as in Berlusconi style, mixing private life, public life, politics, private scandals, sexual scandals, and Costa Smeralda became the headquarter of all of this. Costa Smeralda was the land of many sexual scandals by Berlusconi, but also was the land and the places were the same of international meetings with Tony Blair, as you can see, or Vladimir Putin. So in that moment, Italian politics, you probably know, lived a really strange period in which the private life of one person became also public life and politics and government of Italy. So this happened in 1990s and the first 2000s. This is Villa Certosa, which was the villa where Berlusconi spent much time, especially in summer, and in which he invited also the Blairs, Putin, and other international leaders, but also Villa Certosa was also the house of his sexual scandals and so on. Everything was mixed. And interestingly, the Aga Khan decided to sell Costa Smeralda, or for perhaps it's better, Tom Barrack, an American entrepreneur, tried to buy Costa Smeralda while the Aga Khan was not so decided to keep it. It was not sure on what to do with Costa Smeralda, and Tom Barrack bought it. Tom Barrack was in the following years one of Donald Trump collaborators. He was arrested. He had really trouble time after buying Costa Smeralda. When Berlusconism ended and Silvio Berlusconi died, again, Costa Smeralda was in crisis. So what to do with this place? What kind of tourists we can invite? Under Berlusconism, Costa Smeralda became a kind of television channel. Many television shows, reality shows, Big Brothers and so on, ended on television channels and started again on Costa Smeralda, because all the protagonists, all the people, the contestants, for example, of these reality shows moved to Costa Smeralda, and then the press, other television programs, or magazines, etc., told the stories of these people after reality shows. So he became a really Berlusconian place. When Berlusconism ended, the question was, and now what we can do with Costa Smeralda? And so we arrive at the present. Today, we know tourism has been changing. There is this kind of experiential tourism. Cultural tourism is acquiring relevance. At the moment, Costa Smeralda is not prepared for this, because it has been built for another kind of tourism, which today is not so strong. We can see a really high-level tourism, but it's totally different from the high-level tourism of the 1960s. Now also the rich tourists want to know, want to experience something, want to live as the local people live. So Costa Smeralda is not ready for this. But in the last part of the book, I reviewed all the new trends in tourism, and saw that some of them could be adopted by Costa Smeralda. So in the last part, I suggest some elements of these new trends in tourism and how Costa Smeralda could rely on them. This is the conclusion of the book. As in another book I wrote on food, my idea of cultural history is to go from the beginning to the future. So the last chapter of my books, both books, are focus on what could happen in the next year. And that's all. So if you have questions, this is the entrance of Costa Smeralda, and the brand written on a stone. So if you have questions, if you are interested in some elements, I summarized all the book in a few minutes, but if you are curious about something, please ask me.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or write the question in the chat. I can ask on your behalf. My question that I was going to start things off with, Francesco, was really what you were just discussing. Where to from here? How does Costa Smeralda reframe itself? And and sort of develop an identity in this new mode that's separate from what it used to be? How does it create an authenticity? Can it do that? And as part of that, do locals sort of see this place as sort of a, you know, Disneyland type resort, or do they see it as an authentic experience, you know, for tourists? How can it be reframed?
So my point is that Costa Smeralda has really interesting elements. For example, Monte di Mola, the old name of Costa Smeralda, could emerge again. And this could be really interesting for also exclusive and rich tourists. There are new trends in sustainable tourism, for example, trekking, biking, and Costa Smeralda seems to be really fit for this kind of tourism. There are beautiful tracks in the hills, just overlooking the sea. So there are many places which could be interesting for this new kind of tourism. And so, what should be made at the beginning is to activate connections between Costa Smeralda and the rest of Sardinia, at least northern Sardinia, which is the part closer to Costa Smeralda. Because Costa Smeralda was created as a word per se, separated from the rest. So there are no buses connecting the other parts of Sardinia and Costa Smeralda, because Costa Smeralda was imagined as a closed world. But if new connections would be activated, this would be really interesting, because tourists from Costa Smeralda could go to explore new areas, to discover, for example, the really interesting and wonderful food of northern Sardinia, which now is not so known by the tourists because they stay there and they have the food of the big hotels and the big restaurants, the chains. But many aspects of real Sardinia, of authentic Sardinia, may emerge. Monte di Mola, the food, the connection with other parts of Sardinia, etc. And this could rewrite the identity of Costa Smeralda.
Thank you. Our next question is from Nicole. Nicole, would you like to unmute and ask a question? Then following that, we'll have Sasha and then Denise.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I wrote this in the chat, but I wanted to ask whether whether the locals experienced the development of Costa Smeralda as mostly a gain for their community or a loss.
There was a fight between people from the rest of Sardinia and Costa Smeralda. If I also searched from, for example, social media, and many people say Costa Smeralda is not Sardinia because it's this. That's why the title of the book, An Island on an Island, because it's a closed place imagined and created to be closed. So the rest of the Sardinians actually didn't appreciate this approach. So I think the first thing to do is to break this wall between Costa Smeralda and the rest of Sardinia, and to encourage the communication between the two parts, and to help tourists discover also the other parts of Sardinia. So Costa Smeralda could become a kind of place where there are really nice hotels for rich people, but that's only the starting point of their experience. Then the tourist experience may be enlarged and enriched going to other parts of Sardinia. So the relationships have been difficult for many years, but if something changes, these relationships could be better in the next years.
Our next question is from Sasha. Sasha, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Thanks, Francesco. Thanks, Tamsin. Just going to have a question because this is happening in 70s, right? When actually not only Italy, but the whole Mediterranean and basically Western societies, coastal territories are developing different kinds of resorts. With the new moment in a society, right, which you nicely described, it's kind of something is waking up. Capitalism is getting in. The governments are seeing the tourism as the way of kind of running the process of even changing the society. It's interesting that Aga Khan is getting in with a luxurious concept. So with all that being said, architects are talking about the new relationships between private and public spaces. This is in 60s and 70s, very intensive thing. And obviously Costa Smeralda is designed for specific type of use and user or tourist, and they are also making architects with the typologies, not just the use of materials, but how do they form the spaces in between whatever is the typology. So this is done for how you describe it as Berlusconian people. Are there any changes? Is there any new use? Even the luxurious tourists of nowadays, it's different. What is considered how we put together private and public relationships. Could you say something about this then and now and future?
Yes. When Costa Smeralda was built in the 1960s, there were really, as you said, new trends in architecture. But when they built Costa Smeralda, probably the Aga Khan imprinting was to build something close. Because I also saw other buildings created by the same architects in other places. And actually, they follow those rules you mentioned. So the mix of public and private space, the opening of closed space to what there is outside. But interestingly, in Costa Smeralda, this didn't happen. And all the, for example, the Cava di Volpe Hotel is really open. There are many, many open spaces overlooking the sea, but there is also a bigger fence surrounding the building because all the spaces were conceived as closed. So I think the Aga Khan initial suggestion was to build something closed for really rich people and so on. Today, we can see really new architectural trends. And in this sense, probably new architects could build something new to break this wall between the inner part of Costa Smeralda and what is outside Costa Smeralda. So probably the arrival of 3, 4, 5 new architects could help build something new. And some of the best hotels of Costa Smeralda built in the 1960s, refurbished in the 1990s, are now in need of a new refurbishment. So this could be also a good opportunity to change something and to suggest a new idea of tourism.
Thank you.
Thank you. Denise, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Hello, everybody. In particular, hello, Tamsin and Bill Cope. It's lovely to be sharing a Zoom with you. thank you for this initiative. It's a fabulous one. And Francesco, I just want to thank you very much for a presentation that I found completely fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm in South Africa, and in September, I'm going to visit some Greek islands. But it seems to me that some of what you were saying, perhaps not the purchase of the islands, I don't know, there might be some similarities in what happens to islands over time. So I don't know if you would like to comment on that. Otherwise, I will just leave it by saying that you've given me a lot to think about. And thank you for a clear and fascinating presentation.
Thank you. I can speak just as a tourist, going really frequently to Greece, to the Greek island. I think in many Greek islands, the development has been much more chaotic, while here you had just a new law regulating everything. So I find Costa Smeralda interesting for this reason, because it was a kind of experiment, imposing new laws in a small area within an island and applying these new laws, even in contrast to the laws of the state, of the nation. So as you go out of Costa Smeralda, you see buildings conceived in a totally different way, for example. And the beaches are totally different, less clean, and so you can see these differences. But in Greece, probably I'm not an expert of Greek tourism, but I think the development was more chaotic.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Dionina, forgive me and correct my pronunciation.
Dorina. Hello,
Dorina.
everybody. So my question is, I'm curious if you see the similarities in the economic tourism dynamics in Costa Smeralda and other regions of the world. Because lately we have seen the locales of tourist areas being overwhelmed by tourism, but at the same time depending on tourism for their lives. So I'm wondering if you see what is the main lesson we can take from the Costa Smeralda case and try to adapt in our daily lives on other languages or so.
I think the first lesson we should learn is that it can't happen that capitalists coming from abroad buy a piece of a nation without any intervention of the local politician. And this doesn't happen today, but in the 1960s, probably Italy was a really young country after the Second World War, after the dictatorship. And in the 1960s, we didn't have any rule concerning the construction of building close to the sea. So Costa Smeralda was the first example, the first case of rule, of regulation of buildings by the sea. So the first lesson is this one. Probably the lesson we can see today we know experiential tourism, cultural tourism, etc., is that there can't be a form of tourism which is closed from what is inside that place. So tourism today can't be something closed, something not communicating to the land outside the tourist destination. But it could be the notion of diffused tourism is really interesting for me. So you can't imagine something concentrating tourism in a small piece of land and being totally closed from what is inside. So tourism should communicate, should encourage communication between tourists and local people at each level. Otherwise, local people wouldn't appreciate that tourist destination, and when the relationships become difficult, we know that tourism increases.
We have time for another question from Alexandra. Alexandra?
Yes, hello. I will just reference my question in a little bit of a greater context. And Duena touched upon it slightly. In the 1980s, in 86, 87, I was part of a group. It was a delegation working with handicapped artists from around the world. We had 60 country directors everywhere, Brazil, China, you name it, they were there. And we used a conference center in Sicily, in the tiny town of Troina. It was run by a nonprofit, Oasi Maria SS, that was founded by Father Ferlauto. It was a remarkable achievement because we were welcomed for 5 successive days of conferences with multilingual translation, full meals, hotel room. And the conference center was run by American, Italian staff that came from the United States for the summer, for example, to run these conferences. It was remarkable. I mean, it was built with a hotel, so it had a swimming pool. So we were very, very comfortable and welcomed for 5 days, whereupon we returned to Rome and had an audience with Pope John Paul II. Now, this could not have happened were the nonprofit that I came from, Very Special Arts, not under the aegis of Jean Kennedy Smith, who was then the sister of Senator Edward Kennedy and John Kennedy. But I think what this project needs is some kind of infrastructure that can welcome not just the rich tourists, but people who have nonprofit conferences or business conferences and are very interested in perhaps the archaeological or cultural environs, as well as the natural aspects, nature. So there are biking tours throughout Italy, for example. There are the tours to the Tuli in the east of Italy to visit this marvelous architecture that is centuries old. I just give you 2 examples. So I went to Carthage in the, 2000s, and I went with a taxi driver. We covered 14 archaeological sites. So I think if I could do it, I'm just an ordinary person, hired a taxi and went to these sites, and it was magnificent. They are not very well staffed because, of course, the museum sector is rather decimated there. Then afterwards, the town of Sidi Bou Said is an old traditional Tunisian town. It's very lovely, but it has scads of shopping that is not very expensive, so that the average tourist can go and purchase something and give back to the community, for example. More recently, I have not visited it, but I have been to Albania, Bulgaria, Macedonia. These all have very rich archaeological sites worth visiting, but they're not coastal. But Smeralda is on the coast, and it is supported by, I think, a consortium of archaeologists or groups, especially in Britain. So there has to be first a collaboration of entities, whether they're museums, whether they are universities, yes, partially government, but I would also advocate for a private sector consortium so that becomes not just a governmental focus, but more open. And then, of course, my last question, this is just a basic one. Is there a hospital for tourists in case there's an emergency? One would hope.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
The last
Is there a
one is there,
hospital?
just in case. Now, we did not need one in Sicily. We never did. We never asked either. And we had some older country directors who came from far away, but we never needed one. And in that case, you know, Rome was only, what, an hour away. It was very close.
I'm from Sicily, so I'm really happy that you were.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you all. We're actually reaching the end of our time. So perhaps you can all join me in thanking Francesco for his time today. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to the book again in the chat so that everyone can take a look there. If I can, and I want to thank you all, and this recording will be online if you wanted to rewatch or ask any questions. But have a nice morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Okay. Thank you
Thank
very
you all
much.
for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Bye.